In the first episode of the two-part finale to Bleach the Thousand Year Blood War Arc Part 3, the next set of fights break out across Varvelt, Yoruichi rescues Ichigo and his friends from Askin, and Gerard turns the tables on the Gotei 13 in a big way. Happy New Year everyone, welcome to 2025. Well, I was kind of close with my predictions, I think, for how the rest of the cour would play out. The Varvelt arc was always going to be one of the most fascinating sections of the story to see animated. With an excellent foundation to build off, I had high hopes that this final sequence would be patched up and reworked, transformed into something truly capable of carrying the Thousand Year Blood War Arc's torch across the finish line, without quite as many stumbles as found in the source material. And while we've only seen the first half of the arc brought to life so far, so good, as far as I'm concerned. And these final two episodes do a great job at setting up the climactic showdown to come, while also teasing exciting new developments that were either underutilised or simply weren't present at all in the manga. Of the two episodes dropped last week, episode 39, titled The Visible Answer, is a full-length affair. In many ways, it feels like the actual finale to the cour, while episode 40, titled My Last Words, almost comes off like an extended epilogue due to the episode's shorter runtime. But thankfully, both episodes really brought their all to the table, and episode 39 in particular for this review successfully set up 3 of the remaining fights in a satisfying way, albeit not without a few tiny nitpicks to address as well. Crucially though, with episodes 39 and 40 now behind us, I think it's fair to say that the Thousand Year Blood War Arc Part 3 was a massive success. The extra time given to the anime team paid off hugely, and I think, from a viewer's perspective, that the quality is noticeably higher across the board than found in Part 2. While I don't think Part 3 ever hits the astronomical highs of, say, Episode 6 The Fire, the quality reaches and sustains a more consistently high bar throughout than either of the previous parts, and I think that's to be commended. So, as we begin our in-depth spoiler review and discussion of the Thousand Year Blood War Arc episode 39, The Visible Answer, as always I'll be looking at this episode from the perspective of someone who has read all of the Thousand Year Blood War Arc, meaning there will be potential spoilers for the entire arc to follow, or what's left of it, as we take a look at this episode to see what it added, what it changed, and what it took away from the source material. However, before we get started on today's video, if by the end of it you enjoyed this review and you want to see more from me, and you're not yet subscribed to the channel, then please consider doing so today in order to stay up to date. It really does help out, and I really do appreciate it on our journey to 300,000 subs. Right, let's begin the review then, and as always we'll start by taking a look at what chapters are covered in this week's episode. We've now officially reached the point in the Varvelt arc where things begin to get a little messy. Events begin to converge and start playing out on top of one another as we round the corner into the second half of the final showdown, and this episode is very emblematic of that. 3 fights are set up in this one episode, followed by another 2 in the following episode, so there is a lot going on here, and it definitely makes me wonder how Part 4 is really going to manage. But, without further ado, these are the chapters covered in episode 39. First we have chapter 615, All is Lost. Chapter 647, The Theatre Suicide. Chapter 654, Dead Man Standing. Chapter 655, The Miracle. Chapter 656, God of Thunder. Chapter 657, God of Thunder 2. Chapter 658, Fatal Matters Are Cold, and finally Chapter 659, There Will Be Frost. Yeah, so notice anything missing? Ironically, despite bearing the episode's title, Chapter 660, The Visible Answer, doesn't actually show up in this episode at all, featuring in the following episode instead. But wow, I mean, that is a serious collection of chapters right there, and it's easy to see already the extent of the restructuring that's taking place here. And to no one's surprise, there's one particular sequence that is the majority recipient of said restructuring, Of course, it's the battle royale against Gerard Valkyrie. Entire sections of his battle have already been either removed or cut free and likely shifted around. By this point in the chapters, in the source material, the Vizard have already been collectively defeated and Hitsugaya has entered the battle. Here in the anime, neither of those things have actually happened yet, thankfully, and I'm already very optimistic about the direction Gerard's fight is going in, probably more than I have any right to be just yet. But yeah, as you can see from the list above, we're really pulling from some surprising places this time. I was definitely taken off guard when that little sequence from chapter 615 showed up, but it makes a lot of sense, and actually contributed to what is one of my favourite moments from the episode, but we'll get into that. Anyway, let's move on to the spoiler analysis itself as we take a deeper look inside episode 39 of the Thousand Year Blood War arc, the first of the two-part finale titled The Visible Answer. The episode opens with a brand new scene, and it can admittedly be a bit of a confusing one. That being said, it plays into what is one of my favourite new sequences in this episode, and one that I think is very exciting for the future of the anime. So, we find ourselves back in the Sternritter, where Ukitake is still seen connected to Mimihagi, the black energy pulsing far into the sky above. And yes, before we move on, the red sky is now gone, and the Sternritter has been restored to normal. I am a little surprised that the anime didn't show this transition in any way, shape or form, especially since the red sky has played such a prominent part in the imagery specifically of the Second Quincy invasion, but there you go. Presumably it happened when Yūharbak used the power of the Soul King to lift the chunks of the Vandenreich city into the royal palace, into the sky above, as happens in the manga. That is when the Sternritter buildings are returned to normal, albeit in a destroyed state, so presumably the same happened here as well, just off-screen. Now, Ukitake's condition in the anime has been discussed many times throughout this cour, but it's important to note it again here. It seems like he's still alive. In the manga, when Yūharbak destroys Mimihagi in the Soul King's throne room, he rips the black arm from Ukitake himself, killing the captain at the same time as the two are forcibly separated. Here though, in the anime, no such thing has happened. In fact, a point has seemingly been made of the fact that Ukitake is still acting as an anchor for the world. And sure enough, we see that here too. As the darkness of Mimihagi leaks into the sky, we see it taking on a strange new form. The stream of black energy, which was once Mimihagi's arm, now branches outwards in multiple directions, almost taking on the appearance of a great tree. As the camera continues to zoom out, we see that enormous power spanning the entire sky, a weird network of shadowy vines creeping across the entire horizon. There's a peculiar, sombre tone to this opening. These events are dripping with a quiet, melancholy sadness. There's a futility to Mimihagi's actions, one that will only become more apparent as the episode continues later on. As Mimihagi reaches out across the sky, its actions are juxtaposed with an image of Yūharbak, the king hunched on his throne. Presumably, he's asleep right now, I think, which I'll discuss in a moment, but if he is, then I'm surprised the eyes of the Soul King's power are still present on his face. Anyway, what exactly is going on here, and how is any of this even possible? We're barely a minute into the episode itself, and there's already something to discuss. First of all, how is Mimihagi even still active? After Yūharbak dispelled of it and absorbed the Soul King entirely, surely that would be the end of the Dark Arm itself, as it was clinging on to Ryo previously. Well, I went back and checked, and the last time we saw Mimihagi in action as a hand was when Yūharbak tore the Black Hand in two, and the remnants of its power and energy seem to drift away and downwards, while Ukitake's body is shaken violently as a result. However, it's clear from the opening of this episode that while Mimihagi's hand form was destroyed by Yūharbak, its power remained active regardless, unlike in the manga. So here's my theory as to what's going on. After Yūharbak defeated and destroyed the right arm in the throne room, Mimihagi and Ukitake collectively realised the Soul King was lost, and instead retreated to stabilise something else, the very boundary of the three worlds itself, knowing full well that Yūharbak was about to gain the power necessary to collapse them. Yūharbak's ultimate plan is, after all, to bring the three worlds into one, but it looks like ever since Mimihagi was destroyed in the palace, Ukitake has been working to hold the worlds together crucially, even after Yūharbak acquired the power to merge them. If this is the case, and it definitely seems to be, then I'm pretty happy. Despite Ukitake's story playing out mostly the same in the early stages, the anime has actually managed to retain him in some sense, and keep him around as a viable player in this arc, which is really cool. And to be honest, the weirdness doesn't stop there with Ukitake either, but again, we'll get to that. Anyway, immediately after the opening, we find ourselves with Uryū once more. Technically, this is chapter 659, but it looks awfully different here in the anime. In the manga, the introduction to this scene features two short Uryū-centric flashbacks, focusing on a discussion he once had with Ichigo at school, and then one further back that showed us a moment where Uryū, as a child, stumbled upon his father performing an autopsy of sorts on Katagiri's body. While we do still get those flashbacks here in the anime, they don't occur just yet. And not only that, but the actual setup for this scene is different here in the anime too. In the manga, Uryū returns to the central palace after not having been seen for quite some time, and is greeted by Haschwalth, the Grand Master making his way ominously down a flight of stairs as the two begin to converse. Here in the anime, Uryū is standing in this unusual chamber that we've seen a couple of times before, staring into the centre of whatever this huge red portal is, seemingly pondering the situation. Unfortunately, this portal's true nature isn't revealed here in the anime, which is definitely a little frustrating, though all signs point to it being a Gate of the Sun. That being said, I mean, it would have been nice to have such a glaringly new addition to the anime actually explained, but maybe it's coming in part 4. I still kind of like the crack theory I came up with on the fly in my reaction, where I offhandedly mentioned that it could be the heart of Varvelt, and perhaps Uryū was planning on destroying it somehow, his new means of bringing down the fortress, but that's pretty out there, I think. But speaking of Uryū destroying Varvelt, well, that's all different here in the anime too. As Haschwalth approaches Uryū, Uryū notes the Grand Master has a troubled look on his face. Again, a bit of a weird thing to say in the anime, considering Haschwalth's face is completely obscured by shadows here, but alas. Haschwalth reminds Uryū that at night, his and Yūharbak's powers switch, giving Haschwalth the all-seeing power of the Almighty, and the strange red eyes to boot. Realising Haschwalth has already seen the future then, Uryū remarks that maybe he saw him turn traitor. And it's here that the anime pivots from the source material again in a fairly big way. In the manga, Haschwalth reveals that he has discovered a number of strange chips planted all over Varvelt, which Uryū denies having ever seen. Haschwalth notes that he recognises the mechanism in the chips, revealing them to be capable of breaking down and diffusing reishi in the same way Soken Ishida's Leiden Hand could, which is the glove Uryū activates to unleash his Let's Steal in the Soul Society arc. Officially rumbled, Uryū attempts to claim that Haschwalth's accusations are baseless, leading Haschwalth to draw his sword and challenge the alleged traitor. Here in the anime, these chips are completely removed, and so it seems that Uryū's entire scheme has likely been changed. I'll be honest, I'm not too surprised by this. The whole chips subplot not only came out of nowhere, but felt very half-hearted in terms of its execution. This is supposedly Uryū's big plan? Ultimately, it was foiled very easily and amounted to absolutely nothing. So again, I'm not too surprised it's been dropped, it seems. But in the anime, Haschwalth responds to Uryū asking if he's seen him turn traitor by wondering if Uryū felt compelled to confess his true nature after knowing he couldn't escape Yūharbark's power, which, to be fair, makes a lot of sense. As Haschwalth reaches for his blade, his eyes momentarily flash blue. The opposite of what happened to Uryū during his battle with Senjumaru. So, what does this mean? Does the changing eye colour indicate that Yūharbark is in the process of waking up? Or is it merely a sign that Haschwalth can't control the Almighty properly? Perhaps the Almighty is suddenly going to switch over to Uryū. We don't really have any idea yet, and for now the anime switches gears, shifting to a different scene entirely. As we find ourselves in chapter 647 now, the Gotei 13 has reached the foot of the central palace, thanks to Kyoraku holding back Leal. Taking charge, Shinji tells everyone to ready themselves, when suddenly something leaps into the air from afar. I don't think this shot is anywhere near as cool here in the anime, though it probably makes more sense. But the perspective shot of seeing Gerard leaping towards them from one of the adjacent ast is really awesome in the manga, even if you are kind of left wondering where half the buildings are around Shinji. However, as the Shinigami question what's happening, Sternritter M. Gerard Valkyrie comes crashing down in front of them, blocking their path as he lands on the main staircase itself. And yes, it's finally time to begin this fight. The anime has put off including Gerard for long enough, and I can't wait to see how this plays out. As Gerard welcomes the intruders, he's suddenly attacked by none other than Renji? Well, that's certainly a surprise. Yes, despite being grievously wounded by Uryū back in episode 33 and seemingly left to die, Renji shows up here beat for beat in the exact same manner that he does in the original chapter, wrapping his Zabimaru around Gerard. Though here in the episode he wraps his Shikai around Gerard's outstretched arm, as opposed to his shield. There's no getting around it. Renji's sudden return is awkwardly handled, and feels kind of weird. The other Shinigami, including Rukia of all people, just turn to Renji absent-mindedly and express mild shock at him actually being alive, which implies Rukia thought that he was at least near death. I definitely expected her to be the one to find him, but the actual answer is more interesting. We then see that after Uryū left Renji bleeding out on the floor, he was found and saved by the Vizard, which is pretty awesome. Hiyori and the others rush over to Renji, and Hachi saves him by entrapping him within a Kaido box, gradually healing the vice captain. Interestingly, Hachi notes that Renji was shot almost too cleanly by his attacker and will survive with no issues now that he's been found, once again teasing Uryū's true nature. Presumably Uryū was just hoping that someone would run across Renji because he was still bleeding out pretty badly. But while Renji's sudden reappearance is a bit jarring, the rest of it does make sense. Hiyori and the others found him almost immediately after the events of episode 33, and presumably he's been healing all this time thanks to Hachi. Gerard, however, frees himself from Renji's Shikai, which for some reason really shocks Renji. In one of the silliest looking shots, Shinji tries to just run past Gerard. In the manga, this makes a little more sense because Gerard is still in the process of being grappled by Renji, but here, Gerard is now totally free. So I guess Shinji just thought Gerard would let him waltz on by, but of course that doesn't happen. Instead, Gerard elongates his cloak, blocking Shinji's path before challenging the entire Gotei 13 to a fight, the warrior grinning madly as he proclaims that they need to come at him all at once to even stand a chance. I've never been quite sure how this idea of Gerard stretching his cloak really works. I don't know if it's meant to be a hint towards the miracle and Gerard growing gigantic or what, but even if it is that, how is it working now before he's even been struck? Anyway, as the Shinigami prepare to face off with Gerard, we move over to a different scene, the culmination of Ichigo's battle with Askin, the majority of which did unfortunately take place off-screen after all. Finding ourselves, however, in chapter 656, but before Gerard has even used his shrift, Askin gets a few new lines to compensate for the fact that he can no longer talk about Gerard growing massive, though it is a shame he now doesn't acknowledge the fact that Leal has been defeated. I think the reason for that, however, is because, of course, Leal returns in the next episode, and so I think the anime was maybe trying to avoid any confusion over his status there. Regardless, Askin opts to tell Ichigo a bit about the Royal Guards. Again, the name Schutzstaffel appears to have actually been scrubbed from this particular translation at least, though I've seen a few comments saying the title is present in the original Japanese version, I think. I'm not entirely sure, but either way, Askin details Leal, Pernida, and Gerard, giving us some much needed exposition on these characters, though I'm definitely hopeful for a little bit more in the future. Askin reveals that Pernida and Gerard in particular are two Quincy who were never granted powers by Yhwach, resulting in rampant rumours as to who they really are. Although the anime has actually hinted at it already, where the manga didn't, in the battle between the Schutzstaffel and the Zero Division, Askin reveals for the first time that the Sternritter believe Gerard to be the vessel of the Soul King's heart, something again that I hope might be elaborated on a bit more in part 4. However, despite his pontificating, Askin realises that Ichigo likely can't hear him anymore. And it's here the anime adapts a truly legendary page, perhaps one of the most divisive pages in Bleach history. It's revealed that Askin has soundly defeated Ichigo off-screen, leaving the main character lying crippled on the ground. Kubo's artwork for this particular shot was uncharacteristically weird, with Ichigo looking incredibly, inhumanly flat on the ground, leading many to coin the meme that Ichigo had been turned into a rug, and well, that same look is kept here in the anime. To be honest, I can't imagine the scene without it anymore. But Chad and Orihime rush to the fallen Ichigo's side, with Chad leaping into the air and launching a massive punch at Askin. The Sternritter dives out of the way, and both Chad and Orihime find themselves instantly incapacitated. As a sickly emerald pool reveals itself beneath them, Chad and Orihime collapse to the ground, a nauseating feeling coursing through their bodies. Askin's gift bad looks really cool here, to be honest. I love the oil slick design, that's honestly inspired, which really reinforces the idea that Askin's power is toxic and unnatural. I am a little surprised they didn't go with the purple look to keep it in line with Gift Ball, but it doesn't really matter. What does matter is that my boy Askin is out here dropping main characters like flies. I love the fact that he just sort of stands there and instantly defeats Ichigo, Chad, and Orihime. It's awesome. Also, Chad attempting to punch Askin is, I think, the only time in the entire arc that Chad actually comes anywhere close to connecting with the Sternritter. Obviously, the anime added that new scene where he helps to battle the Schutzstaffel in the Royal Palace, but even then, he didn't come close to actually striking one of them physically. This is the only example to my recollection. But anyway, Askin reveals that while stepping into Gift Bad isn't fatal, he can instantly lower a target's tolerance to whatever he desires, and this time he chose Reishi, making use of the extremely dense Reishi of Varvelt itself. As Askin explains the power of the death dealing, we get the introduction to what might be one of the most anticipated fights left to see. As Askin muses that he's currently feeling full from drinking too much cafe au lait and therefore can't kill them with the death dealing just yet, as it requires him to ingest something to activate, a voice rings out behind him. Yoruichi, hanging from some debris, wonders why Askin wouldn't just strangle them to death instead, now that they're helpless. Askin replies that Bambi once asked him something similar, but the very idea makes him cringe. I always liked Askin bringing up Bambietta here. While we don't see them interact on screen, which is of course a shame in and of itself, it is nice to know the Sternritter actually had some interactions behind the scenes. Twisting, Askin attempts to kick Yoruichi in an uncharacteristically physical move for him, but she leaps out of the way, flipping over the sternritter and landing on the ground, presumably very clear of the gift bad. While I think the character art is a little wonky again in this episode, they do get it right where it counts. This entire confrontation between Yoruichi and Askin looks fantastic. Askin accuses Yoruichi of being insensitive by insulting his style in killing his enemies, noting that choking someone to death is a style more suited to women like Yoruichi and Bambi. While Yoruichi admits to not knowing who Bambi is, she activates her shunko with a smirk, brilliant gold electricity crackling and sparking into life around her. The camera pans around Yoruichi as the top layer of her outfit is shredded by the energy, wings of violently pulsing yellow light exploding upwards from her shoulders as her shunko is unleashed. In response, Askin conjures his bow and fires a pair of arrows at Yoruichi, but she darts towards him, catching one of the arrows in midair before launching it back at Askin, impaling the sternritter in the shoulder and flinging him through a building. As Yoruichi demands Askin let them pass, the episode's most impressive sequence kicks in. Reaching the end of chapter 656, Yoruichi brings her arms up and around herself in a circular motion, conjuring a ring of electric orbs in the air, each of them connected by a crackling string of gold power. With a palpable fury, Yoruichi's ability Raijin Senkei explodes with the immense force of a thunderstorm as she lifts a hand to the sky, tufts of her hair turning upwards electrified into a pair of cat ears, as the tempestuous divine power swirls and gathers around her. As her eyes flash and her broad grin turns into an animalistic snarl, Yoruichi brings her hand down in a brutal chop, directing the lightning blast to Askin. The sternritter is directly struck by the attack and he grimaces, his eyes wide in horror as the electricity consumes and envelops him, the entire surrounding area razed to the ground by the blast. Honestly, this sequence looks genuinely amazing here in the episode, with incredible colours and striking impact frames lending the scene a tangible sensation of power and weight. But the real winner here is the standout audio design, which really puts in the work to create a sound sequence the likes of which we've never really heard before, with loud pops of energy bursting into life as Yoruichi conjures the attack, as a furious whirring hum builds and builds as she generates more electrical power in the background before roaring in a terrible display. It's really cool, to be honest, and Shunko has never looked or sounded better. Also, just based on this sequence alone, the rest of the battle against Askin is likely to look and sound pretty spectacular. But with Yoruichi successfully zapping Askin here at the start of chapter 657, we then skip backwards again to the end of chapter 654, as Renji and Byakuya have easily defeated Gerard, sending the battered sternritter flying backwards into some rubble. Again, I guess I'm not too surprised there wasn't an extended battle sequence here, as I predicted there might be. As chapter 655 begins, Gerard explains to the Gotei 13 what it means to witness a miracle occur. Before Gerard can seemingly reveal his trump card, however, Byakuya savagely kills their enemy by ravaging him with Senbon Zakura, forcefully striking him in the face to the point where Gerard's cracked and broken helmet bursts off his head. The implication from the way Gerard's helmet is damaged, with a massive hole through the back, is that Byakuya literally pushed the blades of Senbon Zakura through Gerard's face and out the back of his head, which is pretty cool. As a horrified Hinamori wonders if they needed to go so far, which, as I've mentioned before, is a little silly considering the present situation, Shinji muses that Gerard almost certainly had something up his sleeve. It's kind of funny, to be honest, that the one time the characters actually act in quite a genre-savvy way, it completely backfires massively. I mean, think about it. Gerard is acting like the standard tropey shonen villain, but this time the heroes actually see through it and decide to simply finish him off before he can use an ability or transform, whatever he was building up to. It's cool, it's meta, and it hastens their defeat, sadly. It always kind of felt to me like Byakuya was getting some revenge here for what happened to him back in the first invasion too, by using Senbon Sakura in such a merciless way on someone. Anyway, as the Gotei 13 decide to leave Gerard's corpse behind, the world begins to shake. And this is a really odd place to add this plot development in my opinion. It kind of feels abrupt and comes out of nowhere. And I can't help but wonder if it was placed here to surprise manga readers, because I imagine most manga readers' first thought was, oh, Gerard's power is activating. But oh no, that doesn't happen just yet, and the shaking of the world is actually completely unrelated. Instead, it seems to have been placed here because at this point both Askin and Gerard have seemingly been defeated, and so the anime is kind of pretending almost to move on to something new. And so to understand what's going on, we have to return to that strange scene from the start of the episode. In a new sequence, we get to see Nanao healing Kyoraku, which is cool, as we don't see those two in the manga at this point now until the epilogue. But as everyone notices the shaking, a building collapses above Orihime, but Yoruichi whisks her out of the gift band in time, having already rescued Ichigo and Chad. In the manga, Yoruichi saves Orihime in a similar fashion, but from debris caused by her own attack. Yoruichi tells Orihime to heal herself, Ichigo and Chad before heading to the castle, as they need to kill Yūharbark as quickly as possible or it will be the end of the world. That last part of Yoruichi's dialogue is brand new and ties into the wider event happening as the worlds continue to shake. And it's safe to say that I am very happy to see all of this. I mentioned at the start of the review that this is one of my favourite sequences, and that's because it's implementing something that was obviously missing from the Varvelt arc in the manga. Can you guess what it is? Stakes. The Shinigami are supposed to be on some kind of a time limit here, but you wouldn't know it in the manga. After acquiring the power of Ryo, Yūharbark does absolutely nothing with it. He seems to completely abandon his greater plan until the very final battle, with no mention of it whatsoever beforehand for no real reason. Here, though, the worlds are very clearly at stake once more in a very similar way to how they were earlier in the cour after the Soul King was cut down. This is a natural continuation of that apocalyptic moment. But not only are the worlds at stake once again, they are in even worse shape than they were beforehand, and a reason is actually given for why nothing has happened until now: Mimihagi, as mentioned earlier. In a genuinely shocking sequence, we see Karakura Town as a continuous earthquake threatens the human world, but the sky tells a much more terrifying story. Numerous, enormous tears in the fabric of reality can be seen, the same tears created by the mass killings of Hollows at the start of the arc, only on a much bigger scale here, and even the entire Soul Society itself is briefly visible in the sky, threatening to break through the boundary and quite literally smash into the human world from beyond the Veil of Death. It's here that the anime repurposes scenes from chapter 615, as Karin and Yuzu are shown experiencing the effects of the earthquake. In the manga, this scene occurs immediately after Ichigo slashes the Soul King, but I like seeing it here. Not only are they not out of the woods just yet, but Yūharbark is in fact gearing up to bring an end to it all. Things look even worse in Hueco Mundo as gigantic chasms appear in the sand, splitting and rupturing the very earth itself. A sinister dark energy builds around Yūharbark as we see the many branches of Mimihagi fracturing and shattering, its power of stagnation dispersing. My guess is that Mimihagi has essentially run out of strength. Whatever vestiges of it that remained can no longer hold back Yūharbak and his godly power, and, with a knowing smirk, Yūharbak's evil aura emanates, free of its bindings of Mimihagi's suppression as Mimihagi at last falls completely, the world free now to be reshaped to Yūharbak's image. From here, Yūharbak can do as he likes, and the fate of the world has never been more dire. Honestly, I'm so glad to see this. These are the stakes that were missing from the final act in the manga. Even if we, as viewers, can be reasonably sure that Yūharbak won't succeed, at least he's trying this time. And all of this stems from the anime actually exploring his motive, which again, the manga never did until the final chapter. We know what Yūharbak wants this time, and now he's actually making a move for it. And so yeah, the Shinigami and their allied forces are actually on the clock. The timer is ticking down to doomsday. The anime then returns to chapter 657 and restructures some of the scenes here. Yushiro's appearance is pushed until slightly later in the sequence, and instead we focus on getting Ichigo and the others out of there first, which I predicted would happen as it makes the most sense to do so. With Orihime having healed the three of them, they take off towards the palace, leaving Yoruichi to face down Askin. In the episode, an injured Askin emerges from the smoke behind Yoruichi. In the manga, this moment actually occurs after Yushiro has arrived, and the dialogue exchange between Yoruichi and Askin is actually about Yushiro crying. But here it's simply Askin muttering that he let Ichigo and the others get past him, so Yūharbak will probably give him an earful as a result. Again, an exchange that does happen in the manga, but slightly later on. It's here, though, that Yushiro arrives at last, and while some of his comedic routine is cut here in the anime, such as him attempting to grab Yoruichi as well as demonstrating his shunpo capabilities, he still gets the chance to go on and on about how he's here to help her out before he starts bawling his eyes out. But when Askin challenges Yushiro, drawing his bow, Yushiro seemingly blitzes the sternritter, landing a massive punch in Askin's face before beating him senseless, sending the Quincy soaring backwards. Clutching his bleeding nose, Askin remarks that Yushiro is surprisingly strong, successfully goading the young boy into unleashing his most powerful ability, his own shunko, Bakuen Muso, which takes the form of an explosive detonation, sending a billowing fireball into the sky. The shot of the flames illuminating the castle spires as Ichigo-chan and Orihime make their way up the stairs into the palace looks very atmospheric and highlights just how strong Yushiro's shunko really is. I will say that with Yushiro arriving in this manner, and the Gerard fight only just beginning, it does look to me like our dreams of Soifon joining Yoruichi in battle against Askin are likely quashed, which is a bit of a shame. And speaking of the Gerard fight, well, it's time again to return there for the episode's biggest reveal. As the Gotei 13 rush forwards, leaving Gerard's body behind, they are suddenly covered in a blanket of shadow as something gigantic rises up behind them. Rukia and Kisuke narrowly avoid a massive foot which comes crashing down, and they all look up in horror to see that Gerard has now grown to the size of a Goliath, towering over the surrounding houses and buildings. I think the reveal of Gerard's new form is a little underwhelming here in the anime personally. The lack of music is an odd choice, at least for the initial reveal, and it doesn't feel like there's enough weight behind this foot coming down or behind the transformation itself. In the manga, there's a kind of cool moment where you see Gerard's shoulder growing and bursting through a nearby building, which is a nice way of showing some scale, but there's none of that here in the anime. It all just kind of happens, which is fine because as far as I'm concerned, the good absolutely outweighs any nitpicks I might have. For starters, I am so glad that giant Gerard isn't CGI, and he does look fantastic here, and even better in the next episode when the art looks really nice. Having his eyes glow in the anime is an intriguing choice, and one that I actually quite like, as it adds to the unearthly feeling of his character, as though something has activated inside him. In my opinion, this only reinforces the idea that he is a golem of sorts, and maybe we'll find out for sure in part 4. However, as he slowly rises to his full height, the anime does actually begin to play some creeping, ominous music, which I do think works really well. It makes Gerard appear very foreboding, as though something terrible is about to befall the Gotei 13. But who should arrive next than Hanataro and Matsumoto, the two of them rushing along a nearby rooftop, presumably trying to catch up with the rest of the Gotei 13, before witnessing Gerard's rise from afar. It's a little weird that Hitsugaya is nowhere to be seen here, especially since in episode 40, he and Matsumoto are shown together. But it is great to see Hanataro. I was vocal about his random disappearance during Mayuri's battle, so I'm very pleased to be proven wrong. And it seems like the anime is not adhering to what happened to Hanataro in the chapter Omake that are present in the volumes, where he was paralysed by Mayuri's Shikai. With this one new appearance, both he and Matsumoto have now shown up more in this arc than they did in the manga, which definitely gets me hopeful to see them both in action later on. Interestingly though, while Hanataro is rightly terrified to see Gerard, the camera then mysteriously lingers on Matsumoto, who has a strangely calm look on her face. It's almost a knowing look. Is there more to this moment than meets the eye? I'm tempted to do a short video on this, as I do think it's an interesting discussion topic, but I'll just say for now that my first thought upon seeing this shot when watching the episode was simply that it was just foreshadowing Hitsugaya's involvement in the battle to come, and now possibly Matsumoto's as well, but it could absolutely be more. Anyway, as Gerard announces himself with a massive booming voice, he generates a shockwave that ripples through the city. I'm kind of surprised this doesn't happen more often, to be honest, considering all the shouting Gerard does, before stomping over to a nearby tower. And by the way, I really like the extra detail of the echo on Gerard's voice. It's a great touch that helps make him feel even more enormous. Speaking of Gerard's size, I'm really curious to see how the anime handles him continuing to grow even more colossal. After Kenpachi splits him in two, Gerard more than doubles in overall size, so things are going to start getting interesting. Snapping the top half of a tower off with his bare hand, Gerard turns and with a broad grin launches it at the Shinigami below. The tower slams into the ground with a huge explosion of debris and dust, sending the Shinigami scattering in all directions. The blast sends Momo flying over the side of Varvelt, but Shinji reaches out and manages to snag her in time, grabbing his vice-captain by the wrist. Before he can act, however, Gerard's enormous hand comes sweeping in from behind, ready to flatten the two of them instantly. I have to say, again, so far I'm impressed with how the anime is handling Gerard. They're able to convey his size and scope really effectively, and this music, which is slowly amping up, works excellently to heighten that. But with Gerard having crushed Shinji and Momo, sadly, that's the 5th division taken out of the fight almost immediately. Except this isn't the manga, and that isn't the case here. Where in the manga, this moment abruptly marks the end of Shinji and Momo's involvement in the final battle, which has always been completely absurd, luckily here in the anime things are a little different. Both Shinji and Momo escape Gerard's hand unscathed, leaping upwards into the air. in a fantastic new sequence, which really shows just how creative the team can be even when they're not following the manga. Hinamori conjures a flame in her hand before sending it spiralling towards the ground, allowing it to coil upon itself. She then activates Bakudo 37 Suriboshi, which is now gold for some reason, placing a gelatinous net of energy above the simmering flame. Anyway, this is all done in aid of helping to propel the fighters back up into the air. Remember, the Shinigami can't create footholds here in Varvelt, so they're having to get creative with how they stay in the sky, which is really cool. Shinji and Momo land on her makeshift springboard, and she jams her Shikai into the Kido, activating Tobiyume with a spark that detonates the flames beneath, springing Suriboshi upwards and bouncing the two Shinigami back into the air, allowing them to reach Gerard's height once again. Out of nowhere, Shinji activates Hado 91, Senju Koten Taiho, without an incantation, and unleashes a barrage of blasts directly at Gerard's face. Again, for some reason the Kido is now gold instead of pink, but there you go. Shinji casually using one of the series' most powerful spells without an incantation is really cool to see. It would have been nice to have seen a 90s level Hado that we don't know, but either way, unfortunately it just doesn't look that impressive here in the anime. And it's not really Shinji's fault either. The spell pelts Gerard's face with blasts, but likely due to his massive size, it doesn't appear all that powerful, all that special, nor does it really have that much of an effect. To be fair, in response, Gerard kind of flings his head back, roaring monstrously, screaming about how much the spell hurt, an embellishment that I think was likely added to try and counteract the fact the Kido doesn't look anywhere near as spectacular as we've seen in the past. Now, admittedly, when Kisuke used it in the Fate Karakura town, it was a full incantation version, but still. And Gerard does look kind of creepy in this shot too, with his gigantic maw agape, and it's followed up by Hinamori also being flung into the air, using her Shikai to sling a pink fireball into Gerard's mouth, the blast detonating on his face in a huge explosion of yellow and pink flame that again does somehow look far more impressive than Shinji's Kido. But what can I say about this new little sequence? It is obviously a massive improvement over the manga, and hopefully indicative of the rest of the Gerard fight to come. To be honest, even just the addition of this brief scene would have been a great boon to the 5th Division's overall performance here in the battle, but thankfully we already know that the next episode teases an even bigger showcase for the Vizard captain at least. As far as Hinamori goes, she appears to be down for the count after this episode, whereas in the manga she is later seen carrying Shinji's unconscious body, which to be fair, absolutely could still happen. But truthfully, I didn't realistically expect too much from the vice captains, and already Hinamori's had a much better showing here than in the manga. In the space of a few minutes, the anime has re-established her as a Kido wizard, while also letting her use her Shikai one last time. And as far as the vice captains go, I think that's plenty. Hell, many of the vice captains aren't even getting close to this much. I also like that it shows how quickly and how well both Shinji and Momo do actually work off of one another, even under immense pressure. Anyway, after their combined attack, Shinji and Momo are swatted aside by Gerard, the two of them flung into a nearby building. In response, Byakuya attempts to strike Gerard with Senbon Zakura. Presumably he's been using bankai since he arrived in Varvelt, seeing as he's guiding it with his hand, but the enormous sternritter simply blocks the blades with his open palm. As Gerard lifts his arm to swing at Byakuya, we get another new addition, one that I don't think is quite as well implemented, this time thanks to a character who was completely absent during this sequence in the manga. Soifon lands on the building beside Byakuya and readies her bankai, but Gerard obliterates the rooftop they're standing on, seemingly defeating the two captains in one fell swoop. And I do have a few slight issues with this scene, to be honest. Don't get me wrong, I'm happy to see Soifon actually involved, and I do wonder if she's now been written out of the battle here completely, though of course Byakuya later returns after suffering the same strike with barely an injury on him. But my issues stem from how haphazardly Soifon was included in this scene. Shinji and Momo's new sequence has literally just proven that the anime is capable of including these characters that were otherwise missing or poorly used in clever and creative ways that make a lot of sense. But for starters, when it comes to Soifon, it doesn't make any sense for her to land in front of Gerard to try and attack him head-on for some reason, especially since he's blatantly winding up a strike of his own. This is the same Shinigami who once lectured Omaida on attacking the enemy from behind, so this feels uncharacteristically stupid of her. Though it does make me laugh that the last 2 times Soifon has tried to use bankai, she's been immediately wiped out here in the anime. But secondly, Soifon being here in this way makes it impossible to believe, for me at least, that Byakuya would have ever been hit by Gerard's attack. In the episode, Byakuya's attack is blocked by Gerard's hand, shocking the captain. After this, Gerard lifts his arm, ready to strike, but thanks to Soifon's interruption, there's a practically 10-second long period where Gerard is just standing there waiting to attack, and somehow Byakuya doesn't leave the rooftop, he doesn't avoid the hit, and he gets hit and sent flying. Did he really not see this coming, even though Gerard has been like this for the last 10 seconds or so? It also makes me laugh as well that when the 2 captains are apparently defeated, Renji and Rukia only care about Byakuya. Anyway, as Gerard turns his attention to those 2 vice-captains, they prepare to take him on, but he quite literally blows them away in what was always a really awesome demonstration of just how enormous he actually is. And the soundtrack, I've already mentioned it, but the soundtrack here, by the way, is absolutely wonderful, and is used again for Gerard in the next episode. It really captures that erratic and overwhelming feeling of facing off against odds that are insurmountable and completely out of your control. As we reach the cliffhanger of chapter 655, Gerard, with a big grin on his face, roars that no miracle will come for the Shinigami, as we see Rukia, Renji, and I think that's Byakuya lying in the rubble. In the manga, it's Shinji lying defeated, but of course we know that's not the case this time. Honestly, for the most part, aside from a few nitpicks that I mentioned here and there, I am extremely pleased with how the anime handled Gerard's transformation. However, we're still not quite done. This is a truly packed episode, and like I said, almost feels like a finale in itself. Skipping ahead to the cliffhanger of chapter 657 now, Yoruichi praises Yushiro for his skill with Shunko despite only just learning it, when Askin reveals that he's still alive, despite standing amidst a smoking crater. Moving into chapter 658, fixing his hair, Askin explains that by taking in a large amount of any particular substance and surviving, he can gain immunity to it, adjusting the lethal dose to the point where ingesting said substance even begins to actively heal his wounds, which is what happens as the burn marks and scars begin to fade away from his skin. As Askin goads them once again, claiming that if they don't hurry, soon enough they won't be able to put a scratch on him, Yushiro again takes the bait, rushing forwards and activating Shunko once more. Before Yoruichi can stop him, Yushiro punches Askin in the gut, but the sternritter isn't even moved by the strike anymore. In a move that really highlights the underlying sinister nature of Askin's character, he callously plants 3 arrows through Yushiro's back in a flash, the young boy collapsing to the floor as blood spurts from his mouth. With his hands in his pockets, a confident Askin saunters away as Yoruichi rushes to her little brother, taking hold of him before scowling angrily at their foe. But taunting her, Askin turns to Yoruichi, a shadow crossing his face, as he tells her that she made a fatal mistake in failing to comprehend his ability in time. Honestly, I mean, this is such an awesome shot adapting the title page of the chapter perfectly. I know I'm a huge fan of the character, but they really did nail the artwork here, which I'm very happy about, considering the otherwise slightly iffy character art throughout the episode. Anyway, moving over to the episode's penultimate scene, we have another new dialogue exchange between Uryū and Haschwalth, as Haschwalth declares that the time has come to expose what is true and what isn't. Drawing his sword, we return to chapter 659 as Haschwalth demands that Uryū prove he isn't a traitor. With an uncharacteristically mad look on his face, Haschwalth swings at Uryū, sending him exploding through a wall and out into the open, where horrified, Uryū turns on the spot to see none other than Ichigo standing right behind him as the episode comes to a dramatic end. This is why I think moving Friend to where it was makes so much sense. We get to see the immediate aftermath. Haschwalth is not really in his right mind. Okay, he's always suspected Uryū, but now we can kind of see him acting out of character somewhat in the way he violently attacks Uryū with such a crazed look on his face, and it's now easier to attribute that to his more fragile state of mind after just murdering his best friend. It kind of makes sense that Haschwalth would be on edge, that Haschwalth would be looking for someone to take this rage out on, and well, it's Uryū, someone he's long had a problem with. But despite that being the cliffhanger of the episode, we aren't quite finished. There's one last post-credits scene to discuss, finding ourselves back in the human world on a rain-soaked evening. We see none other than Ryūken standing before a grave, his wife's grave, the rain slicking his glasses while the warm light of a nearby lantern crests his face. Over the pitter-patter of rainfall, a voice rings out as Isshin remarks that he knew he'd find Ryūken here. As Ryūken wonders what Isshin wants, Isshin muses that he figured it was probably about time. Isshin asks if Ryūken is going, and Ryūken, fully dressed now in Quincy uniform, merely smirks in reply. I'll be honest with you, this is probably, and I say this without hyperbole, this is probably one of my favourite new scenes the anime has ever added. There is a palpable tension to this scene. It feels like the 1000-Year Blood War arc anime has been building to this moment, the setting up of the end. The anime has done a good job, I would say, of building up Ryūken's story, specifically through light teases, everything but the rain, and even slightly more on-the-nose foreshadowing like the shot of the still silver over the course of this cour in particular. But now it is time to act. I do think it helps as a manga reader to know where this storyline is headed in the end. The two fathers carry so much weight and anguish upon their shoulders, caused by Yūhabak's evil acts, and this is the seeds of their revenge coming to bear. Ryūken has said one last farewell to Katagiri before he plans to make for Vārvelt, and possibly his own death, and of course, Isshin will be there to support him. They're so much like their own sons in many ways. Ryūken didn't ask Isshin to come with him, and of course would never ask for his help outright, but Isshin, much like Ichigo, knows to be there for his friend regardless, dressed and ready for action. It's time for the Ishida family to take one last stand against the tyrant that robbed them and really their entire race of everything they held dear. I am extremely hopeful that the anime plans to do more with Ryūken and Isshin come the final cour, and the next episode has a little bit else for us to chew on as well. But for now, that is the end of the episode, and what a wonderful ending it is. It's lit beautifully, the rain is evocative, the art is good, and it says so much while saying so little. The fathers are on their way, and they're bringing with them a reckoning for Yūhabak. Honestly, while we've yet to see the payoff take shape, Little moments here and there like this are really, I think, going to make the still silver arrow a much easier pill to swallow. And again, as I've said numerous times in the past, it's a Deus Ex Machina that I don't really have a huge problem with. In my opinion, it's nowhere near as egregious as the Shinken Hakyoken, but we'll see how the anime manages to cap this all off when the time eventually comes. The poem in this episode is, again, perhaps unsurprisingly, Uryū's from volume 72, marking, I think, the final poem of the cour, and it reads, "If my words had a form, they wouldn't reach you standing in the dark." It's likely this poem is referring to Ichigo, and the way Ichigo has been forced to remain ignorant as to Uryū's true motives, but of course that's all about to change. A pretty lean finish to this review, I think. There is no sternritter in memoriam this time, and there's no need for the predictions, as the next episode is already out. So I'll just close this review of episode 39, The Visible Answer, by saying, wow. Despite the slightly uneven artwork, I would say, throughout, I think this episode delivered in a big way. It was really fantastic. It juggled a lot here, and I think it managed to do so quite neatly. And we're already seeing, I think, this part of the Varvelt arc being streamlined, being made neater. The real test will, of course, be the Gerard fight and the Haschwalth fight, and so far the Gerard fight is looking pretty good. The Haschwalth fight, I think, we haven't really seen enough of yet, but it's getting there. I think I'm very hopeful. I'm very hopeful and optimistic about the end of the 1000-Year Blood War arc anime, about part 4. I'm really, truly excited to see how it all plays out. But episode 39 in particular was fantastic, I think, and I'm excited to talk to you about episode 40 in the next video. Alright guys, thank you so very much for watching. I really hope you enjoyed the video, and I hope you took something of value away from this as well. Let me know down in the comments what you thought of The Visible Answer. Did you enjoy it? Did you like it? Which of the two episodes did you prefer, 39 or 40? I'd love to hear all of your thoughts down in the comments below. Which of these fights are you the most excited to see in the future? Do please let me know. And of course, I want to end the video, as we always do, by saying a massive thank you and giving a huge shout out to my wonderful supporters over on Patreon. I really appreciate each and every one of you so very much. If you like what I do here over on YouTube and you also want to take support for me another step further, thank you. By supporting me at the $1 tier, you can get your name in the credits of every single video just like this, and at the $2 tier or higher, you can enjoy every single one of my videos completely free of YouTube ads. Alright guys, thank you so very much for watching. I really do appreciate your support, as always. Until next time, we'll catch you later, and I'll see you then.